And good afternoon or good morning, and welcome everybody. This is one session of many that we have on our Prospero educational webinar series, with today's focuses on the Prospero budgeting side, including human resource detail. My name is Derek Krebs. I'm a senior consultant with the MSX group, and I'll put my email here if you have any questions throughout today's session. Feel free to email me. I'll be glad to respond to any questions. Along with today's GoToWebinar will be a recorded session we'll share afterwards, the following days, through an email, providing you a link to where you can download that recording to later review or share with others, including the PowerPoint slide. And then additionally, we have a question area within this panel if you have any questions. Many times we'll collect any common questions and also share that with a follow-up email. I'll take just a couple moments to introduce a few topics and agenda within the PowerPoint, but I'll be spending the entire time within the application itself. Let me take a moment to further introduce myself and the MSX group. The MSX group, it rhymes with FRX software, where if we turn the clock about 25 years ago, we all started our team and company at FRX software. We then got acquired by Great Plains and Microsoft, where we internally worked for about 15 years at FRX and Microsoft. So we were original team members who helped develop, implement, and support these flagship products of Microsoft FRX and Manager Porter on the reporting side, and Microsoft Forecaster on the budgeting side. As I think years back, I remember past trade shows when with Microsoft, we always had lofty plans to combine these two products, meaning budget reporting into one. That never happened. Microsoft took over development ownership and neglected the products and no longer are adding these service pack or new features to that. So 8 to 9 years ago, we came out with Prospero as we got spun off, as we got acquired. And then lo and behold, that's where the product is today. So I see a lot of people on this phone call. Some existing customers we welcome back, and several prospective ones to maybe get a little gauge of the product capability. So welcome one and all. I'll now bounce into maybe one final slide or two, introducing the agenda, and then thereafter the Prospero application. Some key little bullet points that we'll look to is definitely we'll start looking through the eyes of our budget input screen, interacting and reviewing our human resources data. To easily load all of our staff that we're going to be budgeting for the upcoming budget or cycle, depending on how frequent you are budgeting or forecasting, you should want to go ahead and import that ahead of time. So there's a very easy import utility we'll walk through. And some of the little behind the scenes motions, which are super easy for us power accountants, is some of the setup elements. Few little buzzwords there, like in our input definition. One of the first things we'll do is in our column, we'll just make sure for our 12 budgeted months to turn on our HR period for that, because also we can have some prior actuals and budgets that maybe we do not want a person's salary to be spread back to those additional columns or fields. We'll spend a lot of time too looking at our HR setup tab, where a couple keywords there are pay grades, which I translate that to be different expense accounts you hit for your salary accounts, and benefit. Common ones would be payroll tax like FICA, FUTA, SUTA, health insurance, 401k, workers' comp. So whatever assumptions that you have, that's where you have free reign to easily take this little assumptions area to define those that you have on your budgeting side. Another keyword would be a HR calculation task, like if I change my mind in one of the benefits from X to Y dollar or some percent, then maybe I want the system then to go recalculate the departmental expenses within those departments. So that's what we call an HR calc task that might come into play. And hand in hand with this sensitive human resources data, we want to make sure only those within our organization who have privy and access to see that data will. So we'll spend a few minutes looking at some key security elements like roles/groups of what they can or cannot see or do in the application. Secondly, assignments of maybe what company or department or locations they have access to, and visibility, like I might have a best case budget and a worst case, where maybe some users are restricted to what they'll be able to see of the different budget versions we have out there. And then to tie it all together, we'll be more focusing on a more bottoms up or approach to budgeting, but I'll hop over to the report where we can then see that data centrally and real time rolled up, along with some nice features of drill down order, graphing, notes. I can do not only the budget input side as people are reviewing it, but maybe after the fact, meaning months later as we're having some actual budget reporting, perhaps where I want to explain some variances within our published report area and annotations / notes. So those will be the topics I'll share with you today. Let me start. I have 2 sessions of Prospero open. I'm going to begin with an end user perspective. I actually did a session earlier today on such. I see a few of you people that were on that session, but for those that are new to this one only, I'll give you a few little glimpses to what maybe an end user would see. Here to the left, what we call our navigation pane that I can minimize or maximize for my navigation and viewing real estate room. The input area, this is only one budget version that my users have access to. That's what we call visibility. Then in contrast, I'll just go to my second session now of Prospero, logged in as a Power Administrative user. In that same input area, here might be I have multiple budget versions that I'm maybe working on, and that is what we call visibility. That end user only had visibility, maybe the one of maybe the multiple ones. To keep it super simple, that acronym KISS, keep it super simple, we always want for our end user in mind. As I bounce back to the end user, in the published reports area, you can archive reports in any way imaginable into different folders that might be year and month driven, perhaps group driven like board of director or manager, or maybe report type like balance sheet, quarter end reports, etc. And I'll even just take one of these random reports that we ran for a recent October month. Now I just went to 1 or 2 little clicks, which is not painful at all to open up my October reports. However, what I wanted to share with you is normally when you or your end users log in, we have a nice little quick launch area where you might have a couple of your favorite reports and charts. Or here might be the budget time of year where maybe with a 1 click, they can automatically navigate to that area for these little shortcuts via their quick launch. I'll just go ahead and open up this favorable versus unfavorable report with this quick launch 1 click. And based on security restrictions, we've primarily restricted our users to different locations. That's why I'm navigating to. In our demonstration company, we also have multi-company and additionally departments, along with an account segment like revenue expense. But you do not see the account segment because those are defined in the line set. And in my last session, I shared about 4 or 5 different looks and feels of how you might want to design your input screen with different dimensions like location department accounts, and either your line or your column or your prompt of the report. So there was a lot of flexibility you have now in Prospero versus some of the historic Microsoft products. You are very limited and restricted to some of those things that we've now improved and learned over the last 25 years developing these tools. As I open up this one report, this is a nice little cohesive actual to budget report that I'll probably end with after we do some budget review and some edits. First thing you might notice is some color coding of memos or notes that we added to the account. I can hover on top of it to see that memo or note. Otherwise, here to the right, we can expand upon this annotation column. And what it will do is give me a time date stamp, because I'm logged in currently as a generic standard user called MGR1 for Manager 1. But normally it's a Bob or Sally, whatever your name is, using Windows authentication. And I can come up here and click on the add button and perhaps add additional memos or notes behind it, because I might be the sales manager, CFO, saying, yeah, I reviewed your budget, I agree with that exception, or et cetera, et cetera. And I'll save some of these keystrokes for just a little description of such to save time throughout the action-packed hour we have right now. I'll later look at drill down and graphing, especially logged in as an end user. So I'll just now bounce back to that power users screen. This is that same budget input screen that all my end users only had access to this one budget version. I, as the power user, here's where we initially define the default line set that every location and department will use. Otherwise, we have easy little overrides. If you laid out all your company location departments on the table, you might have a few different piles or line sets you might want them to use. Like I might have one line set, like this default one, that had expenses only in it. But looking at the overrides tab, if I were to pull up any department 200 within my organization, which is our sales department, perhaps we want those sales departments using a different line set that might have customers or product or salespeople, units sold and price, perhaps in their line set or dimensions that maybe some of the others do not. And here I said in the location, one little side step, because one of the powerful things is the roll-up trees we have in Prospero versus Excel hell. We had to manually link, consolidate, and define all these little templates. But here is where we said in this one tree broken out by region, we said basically my entire organization via this summary node of the tree, all regions for Department 200 use this line set. And we might even have a global input if we have any top-down assumptions or mid-level assumptions I want flowing downward. And that's some functionality, what we call a lookup, that I'll just plug by its name, and maybe some future sessions we'll get into some of those examples further. Let me go ahead and just open up this input template for one of my standard location departments we frequent. Once it renders, we have colors of the rainbow. Possibilities are endless regarding other font and making it look pretty here. I had earlier a much larger font, but I found myself scrolling up and down, and some items were a little bit hidden on an earlier session, so I made the font a tad smaller, so I excuse that, but at least it'll fit better in the recording or for me navigating a little bit more on some of these windows. We simply have 3 items to this screen. One is a line set, secondly the column, and third the prompt or parameters of this input screen. I'm in what I'll call Department A, like here in this yellow header indicating, but I'm just going to come up here and pull up Department B here. We're reading directly from your general ledger. I even on the prior session created a new department literally in seconds that I could then budget to that did not exist in my GL moments ago. Otherwise, in the Excel world, it'd probably take me a few hours to do that, relinking some sheets, files, and templates for it that I did in seconds there. And really what I did is I went between Department A and B. They're using the exact same line set as I'm going between the two. That really does nothing jumping out at us. And let me go ahead and reopen the input. We saw that one override for our sales department, which is Department 200. It might have a different line set template of units sold, customers, product, and you name it. All right, and then there's a different little look and feel, but I'll reserve that for a later sort of sales and cost of goods sold focus one, like this was on the HR. Let me return back to this first department I began with. My preference might be gray shaded cells you stay away from, because that data might be either locked and calculated or data driven from one of our detail screens like salaries, including statistics like headcount, hours, FTE, and the possibilities are endless. Anything you want included, both budget and actual, you can include inside Prospero in our data warehouse. And then related benefits that are also locked and many times perhaps would stop. Notice taxes at the beginning of the year, payroll tax, we had some higher amounts, and then it tapered off and cut off once people reach a certain threshold for, let's say, FICA or state unemployment tax, etc. And that being some of the key things on the benefit definition area, super easy for us power accountants and users to define. Looking at our Human Resources tab, here are going to be some key fields like the employee number as I'm going to go from the left to the right, employee ID or number, their name either by Bob, Sally, Jane, or position, or even third, that might be 2 days. I've reflecting on different ways I've budgeted HR. To recap again, first 2 ways would be on this tab, HR detail tab, by either name or their position. Or third way is on the main tab, if you have any variable, high turnover, lower pay positions, like if I'm a manufacturing company or if I'm a hospital, I need this many registered nurses, LPNs, or this many people on production line 1 or 2, then a third way, I could do it statistically based on maybe lines of average hours and dollar per rate. And I'm going to bounce back briefly to this revenue sort of screen where I simply have units and price per unit. Well, easily I could have maybe that for position 1, rate in hours, or position 2, I could have rate in hours. So I even call that a hybrid model, that maybe parts of my organization, meaning my SG&A, general administrative departments, may want to do it by name of position, but maybe some of my sales and variable area, I could cost of goods sold area, I might be doing it a different or hybrid way. So you could have the best of both worlds in that regard. Continuing on the HR tab, from the left to the right, we have a term, what is called pay grade. Many people think of that as a dollar amount, like, all right, this person makes maybe between $30,000 and $40,000 or $40,000 to $50,000, but really, in Prospero's eyes and terms, a pay grade is really what salary account they get expensed to. And I'll repeat that once we see some of the setup behind the scenes. When they get hired, like we see 2 columns of when they start and end during the year. And I even can break this out by individual month for any seasonality or cyclical nature you might have on some of your staffing. Where you'd see maybe all 12 months of this year or even future years that I could include to the right in a rolling 12-month or multi-year plan, which these first 12 columns are budget to emphasize, and maybe some prior actuals, at least this department did not have it. I was playing around with a new one here, variances, etc. So I could have maybe future quarters or annual figures I could input here to the right as well. We would load the individual with a certain pay rate. And this departmental example is where we have both hourly and salary people, including the allocation to the left, both hours like 2080 or FTE like 1. And then I have toolbar icons where I could compare everybody apples to apples hourly or by full-time equivalency. And then you see this allocation column that did change as I toggle between those two. So I could sort of compare if I have any high or low FTE or hours to be concerned for. When we load everybody, import them in with maybe some starting budget rate, we have pay raise abilities. We're only seeing one, but we can have multiple pay raises during the year by percent or dollar amount we could do, and in what period they receive that in case you have some standard cost of living type pay raise, you could pre-upload them in by default, or maybe you or your manager or maybe central HR person based on your wishes, then maybe might be able to edit that after they get imported in mass. Continuing, we have fields for bonus, including overtime, dollar percent basis here. And finally, over to the right, we do have some additional benefit fields, which are all defined by you. In our example, we have 3 additional benefit filters here, because in our MSX group, we have employees in about 10 different states, where I reside in California. That way, when we load all of our MSX staff, Derek would have not only his name and department as columns in the HR input file, but Derek would also have a California designation to him. Then the system knows what my state unemployment tax rate and limits are by one simple table that I'll take you to here shortly. Similar type of example or story would be on health insurance. I might have just one flat rate, no choices here, but our example has single family or HMO, PPO type other ones, or workers' comp, cell phone, 401k pension, or some additional benefit fields or filters we commonly add on a true deployment. Let me return back to the main tab as that little quick overview. So we see some salary dollar here. We see a little bit of pay increase here as maybe a new hire or pay raises come in during the year. We have now our head count, full-time equivalency, actual maybe compared to budget if this department had some last year data, which they did not, and then related benefits. We also have some capital tabs for new purchases. I could do a devoted HR, excuse me, sales and cost of goods sold screen, but those will be reserved for later days. One of the first things I want to take you to is short and sweet, is the column definition. As a power user, I can easily navigate to the line set or column. And let me go to the column definition. Maybe two key concepts I'm going to talk about. One is whenever we have a balance column, we're either grabbing actuals from your general ledger database or budgets that you have in your general ledger, but most of our Prospero customers have licensed both the budgeting and reporting side, so that way they now seamlessly will enter their budget real time into Prospero, and it automatically consolidates with all these extra bells and whistles, like line item detail, audit trail history, annotations, just to name a few. What we've done is we've created a few different budget buckets, like this one called Budget Original. We might have a best case or worst case out there. And in just a second, I'll take you to this book code area because maybe last year, let's call it 2019's budget, maybe I want to lock that down so people are not editing it. But this upcoming year of 2020, yes, I want all of you, my budget managers, to have edit rights to 2020 for this Budget Original or book code. And the second key thing amongst the book code up above is this HR period field, because we normally would turn on our 12 monthly budgeted columns. And then what the system will do is just take your salary, whatever it might be, 60,000, and take it back to those 12 columns, either evenly or maybe some other spread that you might have wanted behind that. But that's one key thing you'll just need to turn on HR period for your 12 monthly budgeted fields or columns. I've done also an example where another customer, we only had turned on sort of one column where they're keying in some annual figures, let's say in a 5-year plan. Let me close out of that column. And a related thought or configuration area I want to take you to, just to be aware, especially if you want to lock any data past budgets to not edit overwrite. I'll be taking you here to the lower left under configuration, book codes. Like this budget original, one key field of two is, I want allow data entry or data input to this book code versus actual, no. Now, secondly, the open years, I could come up here and let's role play, oops, we only want to have 2020 we're now editing and working with. Or in other words, we've locked 2019 and 18, so only open season for 2020 budget. In this same little window, you can easily add additional budget versions that you want, like best case, worst case. I just hit the down arrow, or otherwise, almost all screens are nice, user-friendly, grid-based or Excel-like screens. I can click on the insert button for. Or usually through a right mouse click, I can do all the cut, copy, paste, insert types. All right, so that's a common sort of setup question I get about budget versions. You can have as many as you want. Here's one way of a few to lock that data down. I'll maybe make a couple other remarks. Maybe in bullet point, I could lock individual roles or users down in the security area, or I could lock individual lines by default through formulas that are done, or I could also lock maybe a rent account that's maybe not formula driven, but I import for my users. We can lock individual lines or accounts. And secondly, I can lock individual columns as well, based on, again, all of your granularity and control that you want. So that sure beats the heck out of just locking one simple column instead of hundreds of individual sheets or files. And back in the column definition, at least maybe to show one or two of those fields I just described, here is a field for read-only or shall I say locked in one of my other examples, like I could lock lines, columns, counts, users, etc. But here on the book code, that's globally across users, columns, etc., which is nice one-stop area at times. Let me close that and not save that as we repurpose this through sessions throughout the week or month. Returning back to our budget input screen for another visual, let's now take a look further behind the scenes at the input definition. That's really the meat and potatoes behind the rest of the setup. And all I'm really going to do is focus on this one simple tab. In the old Microsoft Forecaster era, I used to have to go to about 10 or 12 different areas in every budget cycle or every budget version. I had to go through about 10 or 15 different steps. Well, thankfully, throw that all out the window. Now within Prospero, we've learned from all of those shortcomings and we've made the product so much better where, for an example, we can reuse the same column year after year after year. And we have a nice little calendar versus the old ways is you had to create a new column and a new set of periods every single budget version. No longer applicable. So I can reuse this column over and over and over. I simply just change the year I want to budget for as maybe one example of many new features and enhancements versus the old legacy Microsoft ways here. On the Human Resources tab, let me start looking at this meat and potatoes. I'll call this the top half of my screen, where I define what salary accounts we hit for our budgeted salaries, and then down below are benefits. This top half of the window, in Prospero terminology, is what we call our pay grades. And what I could do is on the toolbar, I can simply add a pay grade, because how about I'm just going to focus on 2 positions or 2 expense accounts we hit for salaries. Looking at this column of our natural segment, we have one account, 6010 for some group of people, their salaries go to, or account 6000 for another. So many times in this pay grade area, I only have one simple line that most of the times I set up for our Prospero budgeting customers. But we just example maybe having a few extra accounts that you might budget based on what your general ledger and budget calls for. You can have also some additional assumptions here, like, is this a hourly position? Therefore, maybe a default pay rate, dollar per hour, which can be defined and overwritten by the individual level. This is, again, just the default. Or it could be a salaried person. Usually I like to keep things simple. I like to only have maybe salaried only or hourly, but by all means, we can get as fancy as we want on that. And it's really just more that usually on a rollout, we'll have maybe phase 1 or 2 just to keep things super simple. Or if we want to get fancy and elaborate, you can get as micro as you want in some of these assumptions, especially more related to benefits down below. Now, some other key fields before I get to that lower section. As I was talking about the natural account for the salary expense, we do have 3 columns here of statistics. Well, many times people do not even have these statistics in their general ledger. You're not required to, because I'm just going to do a quick little sidestep, because here in our natural account list, well, here's an awesome tree, because without doing a quick sidestep, I'll make at least a reference to one of my favorite features in our customers. That is, you might have in your line set one summary account of total expenses, which is defined in your central and single tree, maybe a group of all of your expenses with this range, which I like to translate a different way, means I do not have to update this tree as new accounts get added. And also, if in my line set, if I use this summary account and expand above or below it to show all individual accounts, I do not have to update the line set, which is both used for budget input and reports. I'm not going to use the tree, but there's single central powerful tree. Usually have one tree. We had about 5 or 6 in our demonstration. I am now coming to a list view of our accounts as opposed to a hierarchical tree look. Down here at the very bottom, we just made up statistics in Prospero that do not exist in my general ledger. Like here are maybe some units and price. that I briefly shared with you maybe on my revenue and cost of goods sold discussion where I could add some extra fields or dimensions for salesperson customer type, circling in those remarks. And just to show you how user friendly and easy it is, under segments, here's our natural or main account. I can come up here and literally seconds, I can insert a new account here. Account 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be, new account. And over to the right, we have a couple of different account types, including maybe statistical. I could define that as. And then now I can globally use that throughout the entire system, both budget and perhaps maybe I want to load some actual data to this statistic inside this nice flexible Prospero data warehouse of GL, non-GL data, and budget and actual. And that same remark I demonstrated in an earlier session today, but let me also on the budget side, I role played with, in a new department or new location that I might be wanting to budget. I do not have to go to my general ledger, do all the setup there. I come up here in Prospero, seconds only. I just came up and added a new department in my earlier session that I'll at least show you that same ease and use. And then real time, this 777 department in our trees on this department segment now I'm chatting about. I love Prospero because out of the box, automatically created is this all tree, and it's automatically maintained as well as new departments get added. So I did not show this piece of the puzzle, but automatically as I added that new department, and if I hopped over to either my budget input screen or report, it's already self-contained and reported on the system without me having to go through 5, 10 extra steps or a couple hours worth of Excel hell or GL and manual efforts. All right, so I still love the product to this day versus all the easy button we can provide to your deployments. Thank you for letting me share how those statistics got easily into the system, because it's not all smoke and mirrors. It's literally seconds. So you can add those as you wish. I'm turning back to just my input definition, or I'll call it my budget setup, where we're talking about these statistics for full-time equivalency hours or headcount. Continuing to the right, I can do a default pay increase, maybe bonus account, percent. If you have any revenue related items and commission, we recently added this field for a couple of our customer feedback requests. Side note, under home, feedback, I forget the statistic, but in this 2019 year alone, we had tons of new features in Prospero, most coming from our existing and even prospective customer base. Either it could be a suggestion, and this is what I call a red hotline into our support and development teams. So either with a product suggestion, or it might be a report request or issue. Just give it a title and name, and then we'll have many people throughout the day that monitor this. So I applaud that team for their fast response times in our support, and development team for listening to our customer requests. Unlike the Microsoft last 6 or 7 years had no new features, we have tons that came in. So one other thing, for existing customers, an email I sent for those that attended our last week's Prospero webinars, I gave a little nice thank you follow-up, including recordings to this session. I'll do the same for those today. Additionally, we have a very nice training book and user guides that usually during our install and deployment for existing Prospero customers we share. And if you don't have versions of that, I'll be sure to pass it on. Now, finally, what I did was, we're always usually software electronic people. So instead of having these sort of PDF bound copies that I mentioned are great, gives you step-by-step screen capture, what I did was any screen that I was on, I hit the F1 button, which is basically just the online help. And what it immediately did is it opened up this website, which means, hey, this is real-time documentation that gets updated constantly here. It knew I was on the HR tab. It immediately took me this HR information and setup. And then usually we have some related topics here like, oh, Derek was talking about pay grades, or second topic, benefits and taxes. Well, tell me more, which now I'll do through a narration, but there is the F1 button for the online help. You could easily pull up to help you through some windows along with our support and consulting teams. Let's now look down below. As I similarly, on the top half of the window, what are called our pay grades, I at least made a remark about clicking this icon to add a pay grade. And then down below, I could easily on the benefit and taxes do the same thing. Add a benefit or tax. It just added a new line to my grid. But additionally, what I can do is just hit the down arrow to add some additional items in the grid. High level benefits could either be a percent of salary as defined in this rate column, or it could be a fixed dollar. First couple examples that already exist, and I'll maybe create some new ones here in just a second, are two benefits that are percent of salary driven. Maybe the top one, like FICA, with a salary limit, like 6.2 at this limit for maybe this budgeted year, or maybe Medicare with no limit. Or secondly, here might be some state tax rates. I mentioned I reside in California, but we have several of our support team members in Colorado, where then during our HR import, they might have Colorado code, whatever you define, next to their name. And then, yep, this little field's turned on. Therefore, any Colorado employee goes all the way down to the employee department and their allocation, because the person might even be split amongst different location companies, does all that crazy if-then logic by the simple table that we centrally define what that rate and limit is. And let me go ahead and add an example for state tax rate. Let me just go ahead and close out a couple windows so I don't tamper with too much stuff here. And I'm just going to reopen where I was at. Sometimes I like doing closing and reopening just to acquaint you further with navigation you can do on your own. I'm looking at this input definition of this base budget here that all my users have access to, what we call visibility. I'm going to go back to the HR tab. I'm going to put my cursor here on the bottom line. And how about I'm going to add SUDA. And then we also have some people in Georgia and then secondly, Florida, staff and offices. I just give it a name. I could do some copying and pasting, but since it's pretty short and sweet, I'll just type it in there. Benefits could either be based on head count or full-time equivalency. And one example how those might differ is, how about we have 10 people that work in this one department? That's 10 heads. But how about they all work half-time, only 20 hours a week? So that'd be 5 full-time equivalency for that 10 head count. So you have the option of benefits either being head count driven or full-time equivalency driven, usually the latter, full-time equivalency, but that's some new features also we added based on some past customer needs and requests. Continuing to the right, we simply zoom in to what your general ledger account is for this. This is a live real-time link for both your GL and even maybe those new statistics I added in the fly that you maybe do not want or do not have in your GL. And I'll just use the same 6300 account that we have for our other benefits like these taxes. And I could just type that in if I knew it. I'll just make up some rates and limits. So how about we say 7% and $7,000 for this state, or how about 8% and $8,000 for this one. Now, finally, this benefit already existed for state, this column. I'll come up here and how about we just acquired and grew into this new state? We don't have that as a possibility, so I'm just going to simply click the insert button. And let's just add Georgia, Florida, and I'm home based in South Carolina too here. So I'll just put those 2-digit acronyms for my label, even though I can be longer winded. And really, I was on the Georgia line there in the background for the Georgia rate. So I just want to let the system know that, yeah, anybody with a Georgia tag, this rate applies to them. I could maybe choose multiple choices, but usually just a 1-to-1 ratio is usually more common, but I could do multiple to one. And then here, Florida people at the Florida rate. I'll now add an example or a new benefit filter. So here at the top of the screen, enable benefit filters, we have 3 fields or filters currently shown. I'm going to click on the up arrow, adding a 4th field. It added a new 4th column here. I can go inside any cell within this column, does not matter, and I'm going to give it a description. How about let me call this 401k/pension. I'm going to click on the insert button. Maybe I'll just do 3 choices. I'll just call it A, B, C. just like we had California, Georgia, etc. This might be a 1% contributor, 2% contributor, or 3%. And then thereafter, I might then have down below maybe a new pension line here, pension 1%, and then choose whatever account, either percent of salary. I focused mainly on the first few examples, but let's now turn our attention to any fixed benefit. And this is dollar per month, either by FT or head count. So in our health insurance example, I might have, in a simple case, maybe only one line and one rate for everybody. Let's call it $500 health insurance per month per person. But nope, I usually am more, I want to be accurate in my budget. I know who has single covered versus family, etc. So what we just did is added that benefit filter, gave it a name like health, and added or inserted some choices and dollar or percents for that. All right, so very simple table versus some other products I've worked with past and present. I'd probably have to take a whole day or two to do this, but in Prospero, it's just literally minutes without having complex Excel logic that I have to do that sort of defeats the purpose of me getting back into Excel hell that I'm trying to budget. That's why we love this purpose-built rows, columns, trees, and this table here to do all that heavy lifting for us. I described HR import several times. How about MSX group? Let's say we have 200 staff that we want to import ahead of time for all of our users of people on our payroll today that we want budgeting going forward. Does not matter what payroll system you're on. Can be anything or no HR system formally at all. And here is really the file format you'll need. Well, in our demonstration company, we have multi-company, so I might have an identifier for what company they're going to be budgeting in, location, department, employee ID or social or name, pay grade. Let me go back to that just for repetition. These pay grades, the name could be anything. And the key thing here is what expense account we hit. Because I only have two here normally, but we just added more just for demonstration purposes. Because I have all these extra filters to get more granularly by state, health, etc. So usually I don't need extra above. Back to Excel and continuing to the right. My example is all salaried people on an annual dollar amount, but if it were hourly, it would be $1 per hour. Here might be what periods they start and end. Like I've had a new hire starting later in the year. If I knew ahead of time, I could import that in, or I'll even go back to the data input screen, show where you can make edits for, let's say, new hires or fires that you have. And then these are some of the additional optional benefit fields. And if a benefit is left blank, like I think my choices like were A or B for 1 or 2%. Now, if a field is left blank, like in pension, if there's no code there, then the system will not calculate anything because maybe they don't get pension through us, or maybe they don't get health insurance through our company. So by all means, you can leave that blank. Or sometimes even I create a choice here called none. So in the health, sometimes so I make sure I don't forget either having them defined or not, I have a separate row called none, and then maybe the rate, I'll just have a $0. But that's not required. It's just sometimes on the annual account, just to make sure I've not overlooked anything, just to make sure everybody has a health, either single family or none defined for them. Let me go ahead and save and close this Excel file, and I want to acquaint you with the import HR wizard. Returning to Prospero as our administrator user. Looking here to the lower left under data integration, here is our HR import. We also have a capital import to load maybe capital purchases, Excel import if I want to manually load budget balances. I don't want to manually key in, let's say rent, utilities, etc. We also can do some allocation calculation logic, or even this Excel import we've done easily to bring in some non-GL data, actual and or budget into the system in mass easily, or even written a quick little integration SQL or database script to maybe grab that data automatically from any maybe database outside of your GL that we don't interface with, which we probably do. We have a huge list of ERP packages we input to. All right, just want to give you some confirming remarks and some extra ideas in this integration area. Let's continue walking through this HR import wizard. Very user-friendly. We saw the easy Excel file, just a few basic columns. The batch name is required, and it could be anything, the batch name. I'm just going to call it test. And the reason why we require a batch name is if you have any errors during this import process, they'll be captured and defined here. One example might be I'm loading 200 people for my HR file, but how about 2 people showed up in this error batch? And it might give me a description like invalid pay grade, or it might say invalid department. So clearly identify what field it did not recognize that was not already in Prospero regarding a location department or maybe some of those pay grades like administrative staff or cost of goods sold staff type. Continuing, I will simply browse out to the file I was just retrieving data from. Let me just copy this from the clipboard. Once I point to that Excel file, this window is now showing me the different sheet and sheet names in the file. I'll just choose Import HR. Normally, you've gone through this process before because this gray line is basically where one time only, the very first time, we map our different columns or fields. And once the very first time we map those fields, we can save the specification. I'm going to click on this button called Use Specification because we have not done so. I actually removed that for this demonstration purpose. And now I'm not going to go all full circle behind this, but I'll just do a few here, like company, yeah, one time only. And I'm just going to match that same Excel file format we saw before. Or here's where I map my location column to that segment in the general ledger, department, etc. And in just a second, I'll do maybe a couple more, and then I'll just ignore the other fields to stop with that. All right. One of the choices you probably see me choosing here is the ignore within this window. So if you have any columns in your import file you want ignored, by all means, there they are. But otherwise, a few of the fields above were like pay increase, period, or amount, either dollar percent, maybe any bonuses you want to preload ahead of time or after the fact, allocation like either hours, like 20, 80 hours, or headcount type, just to name a few of the other key fields that I'm just sort of glossing over to save a little time. And before I forget, and in the future, I'll be able to reuse that. So I'm going to click this button here called Save Specification. Give it any name, and then next time I run through this wizard, either tomorrow, next day, or next quarter, whenever it might be, or next year, I'll be able to reuse those same settings and file format from before. Last thing is this was an optional header row I had in my Excel file, so I just want to ignore it, because if I did not ignore it, then it might say some messages like, oops, read only, because here I got a little trigger happy because I wanted to show you really some other error notifications. Because some other error notifications might be, hey, you have not mapped a couple other required fields in the system. And then secondly, sometimes it'll catch the errors in advance, like maybe the company called company doesn't exist like company one does. And if it doesn't give you a error warning in the advance, like I gave maybe 2 examples of errors, I'll just reiterate that they'll be captured further detailed description of what it failed to load, like maybe 198 loaded, but maybe these 2 did not. It'll just list those 2 and why, maybe location department or something invalid. And last click in this window, after I ignore my header row that I had option in my Excel file, I just click on the import button, and then it will load the staff. It'll then also do the benefit designations for us like we saw in that prior tab, which I'll then return to full circle to it. A few little last odds and ends that I usually don't adjust too much here is hours per year. Sometimes I've had some manufacturing companies that they may have a 2 week down period, so maybe they only want 2,000 hours instead of 2080 for what constitutes a full year or full time equivalent for hourly people. Here are some additional pay increases. Right now, we're only seeing maybe one pay increase, but I can come up here and add a second pay raise during the year, along with benefit fields. And we have some other two additional fields that you can use at your leisure here. This might be, I can relabel it, this might be the job title, or this might be the hire date if that's helpful in any of your information or review or something. So those are some enhancement requests that were asked over time that we get included for some of those customer requests by that feedback button. Let me go ahead and close and not save a few of these things to not upset some of my other coworkers who might be jumping into this demonstration thing later this week. I'll be wrapping up here shortly in this overview, but what I'd like to do is let's now go full circle. I'm going to look at where I've done my month-end close. I'm going to role play. My latest journal entries for this month are done, but I want to compare it to maybe the budget that they finished maybe about a month ago to compare actual versus budget. So me as an administrator, I simply run the report once for all companies, all departments. I even can create a report collection to automatically do that in. And here's a few examples, like here are all my month-end reports, and here might be 7 reports that I send to all you. You might have in your quick launch shortcuts for those. I just run this once for all those multiple reports when I've done my latest journal entries for today. They'll then output those to a few different means or areas, like the publish reports area I'll continue with in just a second, or either Excel, printer, the workspace, meaning the viewer. But I'm just going to open up an individual report, but some other little tips I'll provide here. And here's one of our favorite infamous budget versus actual reports that I'll run it for everybody. If I have any variances, I can explain those through not only the budget front end using annotations or notes, but I can also do it on the tail side, adding some variances, which I'll just maybe, again, bullet point some last little remarks here as the time for this session is winding down. But some other features I want to quickly share with you is some other of my favorites for efficiencies. That is the drill down and drill order. I drilled into, first of all, companies. I can show hidden lines, or if I had any hidden columns, I could do that for maybe taking a income statement summary report and making a detail or vice versa by showing those, like I'm showing a hidden column. And my first drill down was into the company level. My second drill down from the company might be the different locations we have. Now I can easily change the drill order. Instead of company first, I'm returning back to, on the fly, I can change the drill order. Instead of company first, I'm going to drag location first. What used to be 3 or 4 different reports in your old world now is only one simple report. Now, instead of going into company 1 or 2, I'm looking at my locations. I can show the hidden columns or IDs. I can come up here and graphically display that data. I can copy this out to email or PowerPoint to share it with people. I can drill in further, 3-dimensional in any one of these little pie graph areas. This would be my next layer down. In this case, company we're looking at. Instead of going from the report view to the graph view, I'm going to go back from the graph view to the report view using this icon. Just like I can go from the report to the chart very easily. And I can send this out to Excel, any one of these flavors. Here's maybe one I've used a bunch that I'll just export that one little version out. And this is what I call a one sheet or one-dimensional file, where I did all departments and all companies. But here is a file I did in an earlier session today. Here might be company 1, company 2, and consolidated, or I could take it out to PDF. And maybe last thing is this is a line set I'm using for report, but also could be used for budget input. So as I show hidden columns, this is a simple summary account. like total expenses, and I'm showing above this row all individual accounts. So in the line set, I do not have to maintain it because here's where we're using a summary account that you can name anything you want. Like we've named it EXPN. Here's a list view of all the accounts, like assets with a 1, liabilities, etc. But I'm going to bounce back to the tree view, but this time, once again, on the account segment and going full circle what we saw briefly earlier. So as I add new expenses, Prospero automatically reads that from the general ledger. Then this line set for both report and budget input oftentimes might be shared. I do not have to update this line set because we're using that summary account. We're expanding above to show all the individual accounts. Or I could say, show me one level down. Like within gross profit, one level down is COGS and revenue. So a lot of enhancements made within our line set design to reduce and avoid maintenance. We're only showing the account segment, but on my earlier session today, I showed you about 4 or 5 different designed budget input screens. The most common has your revenue expenses in the lines, has your months and columns. But one of the reports I had actually maybe the natural and department on the screen. That way I did not have to toggle between department A, B, maybe if I'm entering maybe some central assumptions or maybe central sales data based on what areas or organization or what accounts you want to maybe input to fewer screens or have different dimensionality is how I sort of paraphrase that as. And probably one final note that jogs my memory as I last little tip or point is security. By accounts for accounts with little or no IT help. We come up here in the user definition. Here are different roles, like the budget input person, especially HR related in our conversation. This role or group, had visibility to that tab in the data input screen. If this is turned off, then they don't even see that tab at all. If you have any staff that help do budgeting that maybe do not see salary detail, or if they did see salary detail with this turned on, maybe you want to have that be read only because either you or somebody centrally in the human resources department makes all edits to HR after they've been imported. And I probably won't go into all these extra little settings here, but I can get very granular what they can or cannot do. And final thing too in this area, along with the role or group permissions we just saw, is this user and what they call their assignments. Maybe company 1 they have access to, or I could wildcard it like this bottom line. Maybe they have access to all companies. Or additionally, it could be individual department ABCs. But in this case, how about location? Like Derek, I am, let's role play on the Midwest. So I'm now looking at this location for my security assignment for Derek. So I'm just going to choose this central tree for the regions, this Midwest node, which is maybe all my 4 prefixes, which probably means, again, I don't have to update my tree, and I don't have to update Derek's security. And then I can have some other downstream reports I can filter off of that. I can have calculation logic. I can have some of those overrides of like my sales departments using this line set or admins using this. So can't underemphasize how user-friendly these roll-up trees are in your reporting and budgeting life. So I'll say as I wrap up, here's a nice little wrap-up slide. I'll just see if there's any question and answer, but usually I'll just do so through a nice little email recap some of those that might have come in during the queue. But if you have any follow-up questions, please jot down my email. I'll be glad to address that. And like you attended today's session, we have future ones throughout the next several months already on the calendar for future sessions on the Microsoft stack or Prospero. And those prospective customers, like maybe existing that took advantage of, I'll be glad to have our team do a little one-on-one demonstration of maybe field questions on your process or even a free trial version, even using your data and reports as some takeaways. Let me expand that now. Let me go back to a window or two for the question and answer, just in case any did come through. All right. I do not see anything currently in the queue, but if there's any follow-up item, I'll say once again, thank us for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day, week, and upcoming holiday season. Have a good day. Goodbye.